I'm not gonna lie, I got a little sad when I realized that this is the last Punctibyte of the semester, and we'll be heading into labs 24, 25, and then when we come back from Thanksgiving break, we'll only meet one more time to do lab 26. So let me pull up the schedule and see all the things that need to happen in the meantime. A lot to occur, even though it's only a short little bit left. We'll be having lab 24 and 25 this week, and lab 24 is the soil microbiology lab, which is pretty involved, but then lab 25 is the very straightforward and fun food microbiology. Lab 26 is simply the making of yogurt. We'll be looking at all of those things, as well as I should mention that Josh and Andy and John, you guys are up for open labs, so just get somebody to cover. I feel like John was just there and covering for other people, so it might be that you're getting covered for this particular one. But in any case, we'll get somebody there to help out, because I've noticed that a lot of the students are doing their skill sets during open lab, and I checked off quite a number of students during open lab this last time, and that's certainly something that we can continue to do. And I know that that Schwan, Andy, John, you guys have encouraged them to come to open lab to do that, and I think that's a really great time to get those skill sets checked off. Of course, we also have some other things that we need to get done before the end of the semester, one of which is grading the unknown reports, and I think it would be cool if we could pass those back during lab 26. So let me just go ahead and zoom ahead here for a minute, looking at the last day of lab on the 26th, and of course we can X out the practical exam. That's not going to happen, so we won't meet at all on that Thursday. However, if you feel that your students haven't had a chance to finish their last skills sets, we could have them come in during that time. However, there won't be a formal meeting time, and we would need to specially schedule those times. And I think this is going to be a super helpful thing for all of us, because in fact it will give us a chance to get the final grades done and get those entered, largely because I'll be turning things around really quickly, because we leave for Italy on the night of the 8th, and where our plane actually goes out on the early morning on the 9th. So I'm going to be trying to turn around grading really quickly and trying to get final exam scores done, entered, and final grades entered before we leave on the morning of the 9th. I imagine I'll be rapidly doing it in the hotel room on the night of the 8th, probably. I have heard back from Sydney and somebody else who I think mentioned they might be able to help with the final exam grading. So thank you to you, and let me know if that's something that anyone else feels like they might have that day open. I know for some of you it's not going to be a time that will work for you, but let's try to have final lab grades entered. And in fact, since we don't have the practical exam, let us try to shoot for having final lab grades entered on the 5th. And so that Thursday, when we would have had the practical, maybe we can focus on that day being the deadline for getting lab grades all up to date and ready to go. So that being said, let's come back to the week at hand and make sure that we're looking at what we have going on there. We will have Thanksgiving break on the 26th. That is, we won't have an official meeting time, and Tara had asked me about that. If there's some reason you feel your students need to come submit something on that day, or you want to use that day for maybe looking at certain skills, that's fine, but we would have to specially schedule that. We don't have a lab officially on that day. Okay, so I think that takes care of a lot of scheduling, but the exciting thing is that I really want to have you guys over for dinner before all of this comes to an end, and I've realized that our real estate for that is super limited, so I've just decided let's have dinner on Friday night. So I know that not all of you can probably come, but please RSVP for dinner on the night of the 22nd. I would love to see you there if you can come. We're going to do it a little later. We're going to kick things off at 7, so that'll give me a chance to get dinner ready and set to go. So if you can come at 7 p.m. on the 22nd, that would be lovely. Let's look at the TA guidelines for labs 24 and 25, what we have going on this week. And a couple things on this. We're going to need to follow up on the water microlab, and that means two things. One, they are going to need to do their confirmed test from one of their yellow tubes from the most probable number or presumptive test in the MPN test if we could have them hold aside one of the positives, and even for groups that don't get a positive, the tap water group for example, have them share with someone so they can see what happens in the confirmed and completed tests, the portions there. So help me remember to follow up on that water lab. Also, we will need to help them with how to do their membrane filtration test. That is, they'll count the colonies on those plates, trying to count the ones that are dark and metallic. And then they're going to need to multiply by a dilution factor. That is, if they count the 10 mil sample, they'll have to multiply that by 10 in order to express it per 100 mils. So I just highlighted here that we always express in water micro, we always express per 100 mils, and that's an important thing to remember. Now, in terms of the MPN tests, they're going to interpret that and use the table in their lab notebook to make a statistical estimate. We can talk about how that's slightly less accurate than the actual direct count, assuming that the direct count went well and they actually had countable numbers on there. So this is the follow-up on the water. We can give the first portion of the lecture if we want to, and then have them do this follow-up and then go on to the soil lab. That may be a good way to do things. We can play it by ear based upon your lab section and how you feel it would go the best there. The soil lecture follows that follow-up from the water lecture, and the soil lecture is fairly involved, but it also, in my mind, is one of the most fascinating facets of microbiology that there is. And I actually get super jazzed about soil micro because when we think about the role that soil plays in being a carbon sink and a greenhouse gas sink, it's super important that we recognize that the more we manage lands, that is, the more agro-management takes place, the more depleted the soil, particularly when we farm monocultures, the more depleted the soil becomes, and the less capability that soil has to consume greenhouse gases. The work of one of my favorite microbiologists, Thomas Schmidt, I actually had the chance to see him speak at the Educators Conference for ASM a while back, and this is one of his articles here just talking about the fact that low input agriculture, and one of the take-home messages here is that there's a much higher microbial diversity in low input agriculture than in conventional farming, and low input basically means sustainable agricultural practices. So to me this is like fundamental, it's like foundational, and nothing could be more important to our everyday existence than the nitrogen cycle. So remember that a big part of what you'll be presenting in the lecture is on the biogeochemical cycling, the nitrogen cycle being one of the most important of those, and focusing in on the ability of microorganisms, of prokaryotes expressly, to catalyze the conversion of nitrogen gas into ammonia. And of course, we know that fertilizers can take the role of prokaryotes in adding ammonia to a soil. And obviously, when the more ammonia we add, exogenous ammonia that's made via the Haber-Bosch process, the less demand there is for bacterial growth that would do that fixing. And so the more we see that the soil becomes depleted of genes from those bacteria that would typically do the fixation, the more outside nitrogen is added. So just a very pivotal topic, one to get super excited about. If you're not super jazzed about it, then have me give this lecture, and I promise to be wicked stoked in your lab section so that I can get the students stoked as well. But some of you do it even better than I do. You've gotten to the point where we're hitting the end of the semester here. I think I've videoed everybody giving lectures. If I've missed you somehow, make sure you let me know and I'll get to you. But you guys have gotten to the point where you have a commanding presence in your lab and you're doing an excellent job of lecture delivery. Each and every one of you has seen improvement in your lecture over the course of the semester, and also not just in your lecture, but your ability to manage the classroom online, and your ability to work individually with students, and to come up with creative pedagogical approaches. I've seen some of that, and that's just super, super, it gets me so stoked. It's hard to express how stoked I get about that. So let's look at Lab 25 and 26 TA Guideline. I put these both together since they're both related to food microbiology. I will give Lab 26 lecture the very last day of class so that you can be working on grades and whatnot. And unless anybody is just really into yogurt, which you might be, then let me know and you can take that lecture. But for the most part, I do that lecture. One hard thing on the Lab 25 day on Thursday is that the students really do need to summarize their Lab 24 data, and there's this real tendency to be, we're getting towards the end, and for them to be like, oh, I don't feel like summarizing that. So let's push them to get those summarized on the board before we go on too much and talk about food micro. And there's a lot of good information here about the food microbiology, food intoxication, infection, but these are very straightforward topics, and I think, you'll enjoy giving those lectures. And certainly, there's a lot of information for you to use here. Okay, one note on the Snyder's test. The Snyder's test is an optional activity. It's funny because I do not have a gag reflex with a lot of things. I mean, I manage the fecal coliform lab pretty shiningly and it doesn't bother me at all. But the idea of the spitting, some of my athletes used to spit and like suck it back in, and that grosses me out. So if anybody has a spit thing and they don't want to do the Snyder tube, I'd rather not have somebody get all gaggy. But it is a cool test, so we can encourage it without requiring it and calling it an optional test in that way. Okay, so I think that covers most of what's up and coming, and I hope I've gotten to everything. However, please let me know if you have any questions or concerns as we get into the last bit, and let me know if there's any way in which I can help. Cool. I'll see you all soon, and have a wonderful Sunday evening.